Teal dear, this is the last time I am going to deal with this idiot. Because again, in this video, we notice that he doesn't go after statistics, he doesn't go after facts, he goes after a lot of these moral and subjective points, and honestly, these things could go on forever. So sit back and enjoy another ride on the disingenuousness train, driven for you today by Captain Andy. Let's see what he's going to misrepresent today, shall we?
Hi everybody, so Teal Deer did me a response. And apparently I don't understand Teal Deer because he's such a deep and emotionally complex individual.
Tips Fedora?
He has confirmed that he doesn't understand the things I said he doesn't understand to an even greater depth of understanding than I said, plus has added a few more things to the pile of things he doesn't understand.
You're also now going to strategically ignore about half of the points from the last video, presumably because they're too difficult for you to deal with.
Let's go.
And you basically spend the next 5 minutes constantly shouting about your theory, note the keyword theory, while providing absolutely no evidence that it is true, which is why it is called intersectionality theory. There are no concrete numbers or evidence backing up any of its claims. It is quite literally a feminist theory that asserts that people are always oppressing or being oppressed somehow. But hey, I'm sure you've provided loads of sources and evidence that prove that intersectionality theory is true. Oh.
So there we have Teal Deer demonstrating that he doesn't know what the word theory means when it's used in an academic context.
I'm going to point out something now, Andy. There is no such thing as an academic theory. In fact, you even confirm this in your own sources where you link to the scientific definition of the word theory. In academia, you can use the term theory to mean either the layman's term theory or the scientific term theory. But we're going to come back to this difference later.
Now, if anyone remembers the heady days of YouTube atheism, when it was basically just atheists arguing with fundamentalist Christians, and fundamentalist Christians would often say, I don't believe in evolution, it's just a theory. Well, they'd say, why is evolution still a theory if it's true? And of course, this showed that they don't understand the word theory. Now, theory, when used outside of an academic context, can just mean guesswork or a hunch or some idea you've pulled out of your arse. That is not what it means in academia. Now, if a creationist was to say to me, evolution is just a theory, what I would do is explain to them that evolution and the theory of evolution are not the same thing. Evolution is a process which has been observed to happen in nature. The theory of evolution is a comprehensive explanation of that process. That is what theory means in academia. It means a comprehensive explanation. So the theory of evolution and evolution are not the same thing. The theory of evolution is what we use to describe evolution. If that confuses you a bit, and fair enough it might, are you a musician? Or even if you're not, have you ever heard the term music theory? I expect you probably have. Most people have probably heard it. Now, if someone were to say, I don't think music is real because it's just a theory, you'd think that was a pretty absurd thing to say, wouldn't you? And you'd be correct. Yes, because of course music is a type of art created using sound. That's what music is. Music theory is the comprehensive explanation of that type of art made using sound. That's what it is. So we explain music using music theory. That's what it is. Music theory is not something that needs to be proven. You see, you seem to think a theory is something which occupies some level below fact, and it needs to be promoted to the level of fact by somehow proving itself. That is not what the word theory means in academia. And intersectionality theory, Teal Deer, is no different. Okay? Intersectionality, as in the way in which people experience the world, based upon various different attributes they have, various qualities they have, some which may privilege them and some which may disadvantage them. Okay, that is not the same as intersectionality theory. Intersectionality theory is what explains that. Okay, which is actually what I've just done. I've just explained intersectionality using intersectionality theory. Okay, it's not called intersectionality theory because it hasn't been proven, because you don't prove academic theories like that. That's not how it works. Theory is not something that occupies a tier below fact. Theory does not mean unproven. The term for that in science, including the social sciences, is a hypothesis. A hypothesis, right? You don't know the difference. Okay? It's more than a bit embarrassing for you that you do not know this, because you presumably are a fan of people like Thunderfoot. I think you've said in one of your videos that you have a certain amount of admiration for Thunderfoot. You know, have you not followed this whole debacle that is YouTube atheism? Do you not remember the days when this was the favoured argument? So, yes, you don't understand what a theory is in its academic context. This is one of the many pitfalls of using the dictionary as though it's some sort of oracle of all knowledge. Okay, because the dictionary will tell you what theory means in its colloquial sense, I should imagine. That's not where I go for my information, by the way. You know. So yes, I will be using this example, by the way, in future videos if I wish to talk about people who misunderstand what the word theory is. So I suppose I should say thank you for giving me an example of this. You can admit you're wrong if you like.
Or instead, I could point out how you haven't understood what I've actually said, which is much easier. Because, Andy, you are working under the assumption here that intersectionality is a science. And I'm sorry here, but someone is going to have to tell you this eventually. Intersectionality falls under the branch of study known as sociology. Sociology is not a science. And that is the crux of your assertion here. You are asserting that sociology is a natural science right up there along with physics and chemistry. That is why, when I talk about intersectionality theory, I use the layman's term theory, because I do not consider it to be a science. So now, I'm going to prove to you why sociology, and therefore intersectionality, is not a science. And to do this, all you have to do is have a basic understanding of the scientific method. You know, the scientific method that says you start off with a hypothesis for something. You set up a test for that particular hypothesis, in which you write out your method. You then conduct your experiment. Now, a key point about that method and the experiment is that they must be repeatable. And then the other essential criteria for what would make it a scientific experiment would be if you could take those results and then predict results for future experiments. And I'm now going to put this entire scientific process into practice looking at two different theories. One, the scientific theory of intersectionality, according to you, and the scientific theory of gravity. And I am going to show you why one of them is a scientific theory and why the other one is not. So we want to prove the theory of gravity, so we want to test it. Now, we have multiple ways of doing this, but the simplest is to drop an object. Now, we have several things that we can objectively measure here. So we can have an object, we can measure its size, we can measure its density, we can measure its weight, we can measure all sorts of things about it entirely objectively. We can measure the specific distance that we are going to drop that object to the floor. We can measure the exact speed that object attains en route to the floor. And all of these facts can be written down into our methodology. We can exactly state what we are going to do and how we are going to do it, and we can set up a control for that experiment. That methodology can then be taken, given to someone else, and they could repeat the experiment. As in, if they had the same object or a similar object of a similar mass, of a similar size, they set up a similar distance from the ground, it would fall at a similar rate, and they would be able to repeat the experiment. And in that repetition, they would be able to yield the same results. So now we have several elements of what makes this a scientific theory. Insofar as we can set up a methodology for it, we can test it, we can repeatedly test it, we can always get the same results, and using the results that we have, we can predict results in the future. And in some cases, we can predict the results with 100% accuracy. And a really important thing to note about these sorts of scientific theories is that you can write a generalized law about them. such as Newton's law of universal gravitation. So the theory that can be repeatedly proved, and I use the scientific definition of proof there as in tested, will provide evidence for how gravity works. But because it is so consistent, we are able to write a law that will specifically tell you how two objects will behave in certain circumstances. So this is why, if we take this example, physics is a natural science. And now we look at sociology and intersectionality, and we realize that none of these criteria are applicable. There is no objective way of measuring anything in sociology. Everything in sociology, psychology, and intersectionality is all measured subjectively. There is no tape measure for oppression. There is no thermometer for social integration. There is no speedometer for racism. So we've already established that sociology is in no way actually objectively measurable. And then there's the problem of predictability. Even if the method by which you study intersectionality is absolutely concrete and iron-cast, which it isn't, because it will always be subjective, but let's say, for the sake of argument, that it is, you will still never be able to accurately predict the results of an experiment within sociology or psychology or indeed intersectionality, because people, unlike elements or forces, do not behave in prescribed ways in prescribed circumstances, which is why there are no sociological or intersectional scientific laws, because there is no mathematical equation that will tell you exactly how two people will interact given a certain circumstance, which means that it cannot be predicted, which means that any tests can never be fully, accurately, 100% replicated. And this is why, when I refer to intersectionality theory, I give it the layman's term, theory, because I, and many others, do not consider sociology and intersectionality to be a science, because it isn't. I'd be completely okay with it being called intersectional hypothesis, but your assertion that the study of intersectionality can be right up alongside all the other natural sciences, like, say, the laws of gravity and things like that, is just ridiculous and nonsensical, because it fails even the most basic criteria for what could be considered a science. I mean, if we take your approach to things saying that anything that is a theory that gives a comprehensive explanation of something must be a science, then by your definition, music is a science, which it is not. And it's not a science because so much of music theory is subjective. Things like this group of notes forming a scale. The reason the scale exists is because it sounds good, which is an entirely subjective point, because if you look at a musical scale, the notes are never regularly spaced apart, which is why in music scales there are different modes. But this is very much by the by, and I think from this we can quite safely say that Captain Andy A does not understand science and B does not understand music. However, this is a point that I'm going to agree to disagree on, because Andy's subjective criteria for what he considers a science to be are different from my subjective criteria for what I consider a science to be. But this is why I do not consider intersectionality theory to be worthy of the scientific term theory. There may well be a day when objective, measurable, repeatable, and predictable criteria for sociology, psychology, and intersectionality are discovered, but today is not that day. But hey, before we even go on to the video, let's take a look at the video description, shall we? Because it is rib-ticklingly amusing. Trigger warning. This video features Teal Deer, a rape apologist, transphobe, homophobe, racist, misogynist, and all-round obnoxious twerp. I think we should maybe actually address some of these before we go anywhere, because those are some very serious allegations, some of which are actually illegal and punishable by jail time. So if you genuinely believe that I am responsible for any of these criminal activities, you should indeed feel free to get the police involved.
No, being a bigot is not a crime. It certainly isn't punishable by jail time. There are certain crimes which may be motivated by bigotry, but bigotry itself is not a crime. You are stupid for thinking otherwise, and so is anyone who agrees with you.
Correct. Being a bigot is not illegal. However, some of the things that you accuse me of being are. So let's nip on over to the Crown Prosecution Service website. Oh, would you look at that? They have entire categories for incitement of racial hatred. But let's read a little bit of that, shall we? Because I think it'll help you understand a little bit more how the law actually works. Incitement to racial hatred. This offence is committed when the accused person says or does something which is threatening, abusive, or insulting, and, by doing so, either intends to stir up racial hatred or makes it likely that racial hatred will be stirred up. This can include such things as making a speech, displaying a racist poster, publishing written material, performing a play, or broadcasting something in the media. So Andy, considering the only thing that I do on my channel is make speeches, if you have solid evidence of me making racist statements, that could quite easily be construed as me attempting to incite racial hatred against a certain ethnic group, which would be a crime. So if you genuinely believe that I am spreading racist messages in any of my videos, report those videos to the police. But you're not going to, because there is no evidence of it. But anyway, moving on. Rape apologist. I'm not sure you actually know what the word apologist means. But I have repeatedly made it clear on my channel that under no circumstances is rape ever acceptable.
Well, your claim in the video to which I originally responded was that if someone goes to your hotel room, that counts as consent, even if they change their mind. That was your claim.
No, it wasn't. I'm now going to totally blow this point out of the water for you, Andy, because you have intentionally misrepresented what I have said. You have outright lied to everyone. Because what I originally said was this.
A third of people in the UK believe that a woman is partially or totally responsible for her own rape if she was flirting. Flirting is not consent. She isn't responsible.
I am just going to call bullshit here. If you are flirting with someone, you know that you are flirting with them, and you know exactly what the purpose of flirting is. While that doesn't excuse rape, it still very heavily implies consent. At what point did I say there is some magical line that two people can cross where no becomes an unacceptable answer? But hey, let me make this abundantly clear for you. I am going to now sum up my view when it comes to sexual consent nice and simply in a nice little soundbite for you. You ready? No means no. The word no can be issued at absolutely any point up to and including during sexual intercourse. So once again, you have asserted that you know what my position is and stated what my position is when that is not my position. I realize intellectual honesty is difficult for you, but for fuck's sake, this point was weak. Homophobe. Yeah, once again, I really don't think you actually know anything about my sexual orientation or preferences, and are just throwing around baseless or downright incorrect accusations in an attempt to defame my character and get people who are watching your video to dislike me before they have even heard the content of what I have to say.
Okay, here is why I think you are homophobic and transphobic.
Kind of related to that, I need feminism because I'm not very good at being a traditional man. I went to an all-guys high school, yeah, and I spent most of my time in high school trying to be a better dude.
You must have had a lot of time to think on that subject when you were crammed into those lockers.
I say try because I failed often, and sometimes I would slip and do something traditionally feminine, like sit with my legs crossed, or say something with a higher intonation in my voice.
Or show up wearing some nice frilly lacy panties on a day when you had gym class.
So yeah, I think it's pretty obvious why I think you're homophobic and transphobic. I don't know how anyone would get any other message from that particular clip. You know, you are clearly mocking this young man who is a heterosexual person, but who does not fit society's expected norms of what a heterosexual person should be.
I'm just going to leave this short video clip right here, and you can go away and feel not only like an idiot, but also like a bigot in your own time.
I started asking myself, what if I'm attracted to guys as well as girls? And I think y'all can infer based on what this video has been leading up to, the answer that I found out was, because like I said, the label straight didn't really ever feel right to me. And while I'm predominantly physically drawn to women, I also am physically drawn to men as well. It's just a thing.
And you do mock him by implying that he might dress in a way that is typically feminine. So yes, I concluded you're homophobic and transphobic from that clip.
And you would be wrong. I get that humour is hard for you, Andy, but that is what we in the real world call a joke. Also, I would really just like to highlight what you say in the next few seconds, because this really is fucking hilarious. You ready? Go on, Andy. Dig your own grave.
But hey, I mean, I'm sure there's some deep, pedantic, amazing meaning that I'm completely missing, that only super intellectuals such as the angry 14-year-olds and sex offenders who subscribe to your channel can understand, and it's clearly just gone over my head.
This is gonna hurt you. Seriously, implying that someone at the current point of recording has 10,000 people subscribed to them, all of whom are angry 14-year-old sex offenders? Now, I'm not going to condone any of the repercussions you receive from that, but don't be surprised if you get a few. Racist. Another word that I don't think you actually know the meaning of. While I do believe that there are differences between the races, as is pretty much self-evident in the fact that we have different races, I do not believe that any of these differences makes any type of people inherently superior or inherently inferior to any other. However, I have this sneaking suspicion that you are using the social justice definition of racism, which is something to do with prejudice and power. And if that is the case, then you are making the assumption that I am white, to which I have only one response.
Yes, white people are hilarious.
So you are implying that I'm white. You absolute racist.
Yes, I am using the social justice definition of racism because that is a much more comprehensive definition than the dictionary can provide. The dictionary simply gives you a brief overview of a word. That's it. And it is also descriptive, not proscriptive.
Right, you heard it here from Captain Andy, guys. Words do not have meanings anymore. So when I call Captain Andy a child molester, I am not using the dictionary definition of the word child, which states that a child is a young human being below the age of puberty or below legal age of majority. I am in fact referring to a pie, the thing with a crust and a filling that is delicious. And when I say molester, I am not meaning the dictionary definition of molest, which means to assault or abuse someone sexually. I in fact just mean a person that likes to eat something. So whenever I declare Captain Andy to be a child molester, I in fact mean that he is a person who enjoys eating pies. A fact that is incredibly self-evident if you can see him past his 3 chins. And finally, misogynist. Again, another word that I really do not think you actually know the meaning of. Because I do not hate women. I do not dislike women. I do not mistrust women. And I do not mistreat women. I dislike some people, some of whom,
most of whom,
happen to be women, but my dislike of them is based purely on the content of their character and not on the form of their genital.
For someone who's trying to argue they're not a transphobe, you might want to remember that what makes someone a man or a woman is not their genitals.
So because you've totally avoided the point here, I'm going to assume this is you admitting that I am not a misogynist. I'm glad we finally agreed on something. Well, if we're going for a context thing here, why don't we ask Lacey Green to provide an academic peer-reviewed paper that proves that it actually does exist? Or better yet, why don't you provide an academic peer-reviewed paper that proves that the pay gap does exist?
Sure, link in the description. Although I should point out that I've noticed this is not the first time someone's provided you with this.
I, on the other hand, in the box beneath this video, will link to several articles proving that it doesn't exist, and will also include a link to the feminist academic author Christina Hoff Sommers, who also says that it doesn't exist. So I will be providing several sources showing you that it doesn't exist, while in the context of this video, Lacey Green and yourself will merely be asserting that it does.
Okay, let's have a look at these sources. Yeah, that's not a peer-reviewed paper. That's also not peer-reviewed. That's not peer-reviewed. And that's not peer-reviewed. But wait, there is a link in that one. And it links to a peer-reviewed paper. Okay, let's have a look at that. Oh fuck, it doesn't go anywhere. It's almost as though the people who are hosting that particular study realised it was a load of bullshit and stopped hosting it. Now, I know you seem to be a big fan of Professor Christina Hoff-Sommers' tale there, but I should point out to you that for a professor, she doesn't seem to be very good at getting her work peer-reviewed, which is odd because you'd think, being a professor, she'd know exactly what channels to go through to get that done. She also works for a group called the American Enterprise Institute, who are a conservative think tank with a proven track record for promoting pseudoscience. So you'd think it's a bit odd that someone who can supposedly work for a proper academic institution has decided to work for one with an incredibly bad reputation.
At no point did I state any of those articles were peer-reviewed academic papers. I even said that to you before I put them up on the screen. Nice straw man, though. Now I'm going to apply a little bit of Andy logic to your own source. Because you are so willing to hand-wave away people like Christina Hoff-Sommers and say, well, they're part of an ideologically driven think tank, which therefore means we can't trust anything they have to say. Let's now look at your source. And this source is from the United States Department of Labor, an organization funded by the United States government. That organization that has invested millions of dollars and thousands of hours of labor into feminist causes. I mean, they must be totally unbiased on this issue. It's not as if they have any horses in this race at all. So if you are able to hand-wave away one source and say, well, they're invested in this, they have an ideological bias, then guess what I'm going to do with your source? That's right, I'm just going to hand-wave it away and say, well, it's funded by an organization that perpetuates these kind of myths, and therefore it's in their best interests to do so. Andy logic! My issue that I take with this is that feminists use examples of third world problems to state that women everywhere are being oppressed. They then go on to make stupid claims such as the worse than fallacy, whereby they like to state things like being raped and then stoned to death for being raped is in some way equitable to a woman being the victim of manspreading.
Can you show me an example of a feminist who says being stoned to death and raped is equitable to manspreading?
I'm using this as a generalized example about the kind of hypocrisy that they display. The fact that feminists are willing to complain about things such as manspreading, yet never comment on things such as a woman being stoned to death for the crime of being raped. Again, I know this is hard for you, but you're just going to have to bear with it. It is the use of other people's suffering to push their own agenda that I find objectionable.
Well, if you're using third world women as an argument against feminism, then that's kind of what you're doing.
Except that's not what I'm doing at all. All I am in fact doing is pointing out the hypocrisy of first world feminists. I am not using the plight of third world women to further anyone's agenda. This response was made to Lacey Green asserting that pregnancy and giving birth is somehow some sort of female strength. First of all, pregnancy and childbirth are a personal choice,
which has no bearing whatsoever on whether or not it takes strength.
Something that you are aware of when you get into the situation. You know of the pain and the problems that it can cause. So putting yourself in a position where you know you are going to suffer a lot of physical discomfort, to say the least, and then crying that it makes you somehow strong and demanding sympathy for it, is retarded.
Yeah, if only someone had given your mother that advice. Yeah, I went there.
Ha! But wait, did you just make a joke where the punchline was the fact that someone was a woman? Well, by your own logic, that makes you a misogynist. By this logic, a man could wear a pregnancy simulator for 9 months and be deemed strong. My comment about morphine as one example of drugs that can be administered during pregnancy and childbirth is pointing out that to call it some sort of strength when there are dozens of medical aids designed to make the procedure as easy as possible is somewhat ridiculous. Again, saying that it makes a woman strong to give birth, a process that she actually doesn't even need to be conscious for anymore, is ridiculous.
Well, the point is, Teal dear, she is trying to refute this idea that women are naturally weak. Now, as you seem to be a fan of evolution, as you've tried to use it to justify slut-shaming and so on in some of your earlier videos,
explaining the reason for something existing is not the same as justifying it, you fucknugget. In fact, in my own words in that video, I actually even say, it's not right. But this is somewhat a misrepresented side point. Let's get back onto the main issue.
You should know that just because we supposedly can now have women give birth painlessly, although I think most women would probably argue with you quite vehemently on that issue, that doesn't mean they lose their natural strengths. But yet, Teal, just go into a room full of women, especially women who've given birth, and try and use this reasoning and film it, please, so I can watch it.
You know, I'm actually kind of getting lost in exactly what point he's trying to make here. So let's clear it up from the beginning. Lacey Green makes a statement that women are not weak because some women give birth. So she is effectively asserting that the choice actions of a few individuals make an entire gender strong. Do you not see how this makes no sense at all? This is like me saying Captain Andy is a white guy and stupid, therefore all white guys are stupid. It just doesn't follow as a logical, rational statement in any capacity. So all the rest of the nonsense that you've said here, we realise just how ridiculous and nonsensical and unnecessary it was.
Now, to deal with the no true Scotsman fallacy, which I should point out I never actually used, I never said Camille Paglia or Christina Hoff Sommers weren't true feminists, so it's not really a position I particularly need to defend. But what I would say is the no true Scotsman fallacy is not some sort of license for us to just put people into certain categories or put ourselves into certain categories and expect.
I'm sure this is all incredibly interesting, Andy, but I'm going to sum up the reason why I used the line, because they're not true Scotsmen, right, in response to the point that you made. And I'm going to do it using a picture, so it's really easy for you to understand what's happened here.
So that's pretty much it for this video. I don't really want to go over the things I went over in the last video again and again and again. There are certain things that I don't think, no matter how many times I explain to Teal Deer or any of the degenerates who subscribe to his channel, I don't think it matters how many times you explain some of these things, I don't think they're going to get them. But I thought, you know, some of these things were worth going over.
And then there's the usual lengthy sign-off from Captain Windbag here. And now I'm going to point out the hilarity of this man who said something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm not interested in opening a dialogue with you, Teal dear," made a response to my first video within about 12 hours of it going up, bringing his total videos about me to 2 in the space of 48 hours. Someone really wants attention. Would you like a hug, Andy? Would you like me to give you a hug? Would you like me to give you a hug, pat you on the back, stroke your head, and tell you that you're a valued member of society? Would that make you feel better? Anyway, unlike Captain Andy, I am now going to say that I am actually not interested in having a dialogue with this, so this is going to be the last video that I'm going to make about him. So this is me shaking the drowning rat off my coattail. And hopefully with Andy no longer featuring anywhere in any of the videos on my channel, maybe that strange stench that's been hanging around will just go away. but I'll get the bleach out just to make sure.